Okay, welcome. What I'm going to do is I'm going to factor 4 different problems using different methods. So first, I'm going to factor out the greatest common factor out of this term, out of this expression. Normally, you always check to see if there's a greatest common factor out of every expression before you do any other factoring techniques. The first step is, what is the largest number that divides into both of these? So 5 and 5, that's pretty easy. The largest number that divides into both of those is 5. The second step, what is the lowest power x? I have x to the third power, and I just have an x, which is really x to the 1 power. It's an invisible 1 there. So the lowest power x is just x to the 1 power, or x. The next step of finding the greatest common factor is dividing each term by what we have outside the parentheses, what we found outside the parentheses. I get 5 divided by 5, which is 1. x3 divided by x, remember when you have exponents and you're dividing them, same base, the base stays the same. You subtract the powers. 3 minus 1 is 2. 5 divided by 5 here is 1. x1 divided by x1, they cancel out, and you can say they cancel out, they turn into x0, x0 equals 1, or you can just say they cancel out. If you have the same thing on top as the bottom, they just cancel out, and it turns into 1. So this is the answer. I'm just going to clean it up a little bit. 5x times 1x squared is the same thing as saying x squared, and then plus 1, close parentheses. Here's our answer. We factored out the greatest common factor. Factor out means divide. And if you want to go backward, you can go ahead and multiply this, and you'll end up right where we began. But all we did was factor, and what's in the square is our answer. So that's 1. We got 3 more problems. The second problem, I'm going to factor out the greatest common factor. You always try to do that first. So looking at all 3 of these, what number divides into each of these terms? What is the largest number? Well, 2 divides into each, but the largest number that divides into each is 3. So I'm going to put a 3. It's not 3. The largest number that divides into each is 6. 6 divides into each of these terms. 6, 12, and 18. Next, what is the lowest power x? I have x2, I have x1, and I have no x. So the lowest power x is no x. I don't put anything outside the parentheses as far as x is. I'm going to divide each term by what I have outside the parentheses. And I get 6 divided by 6 is 1 with an x squared, 1x squared. Negative 12 divided by 6 is a minus 2x. And negative 18 divided by 6 is a minus 3. So I did the greatest common factor. Next, I want to see if I can factor this using the 3-term method. I have 3 terms here. 1, 2, 3. The 6 is going to be part of my answer. I'm just going to leave that there. But I'm going to try to factor my parentheses using the 3-term method. The steps for factoring the 3-term method were find all pairs that multiply together to equal the last term. The last term is 3, so 1 times 3 is 3, and that's it. You can say 3 times 1, but 1 times 3 is fine. There's no other pairs that multiply together to equal 3. The second step is erase the multiplication signs and add or subtract these numbers to try to equal the middle term, negative 2. So I'm going to put a negative 3 and a positive 1. Do you see how this equals a negative 2? 1 minus 3 is a negative 2. So once you have your pair that multiply together to equal a negative 3 here, and they add or subtract to equal a negative 2, they have to multiply to equal the last term. They have to add or subtract to equal the middle term. Once you have that, you write 2 big parentheses. The 6 is going to stay in front. You're always going to have x in front because this is factoring 3 terms when the number in front of x squared equals 1. So it's x squared. X times x does equal x squared. And then you're going to use your pair. My pair is a plus 1. You're going to put it in the parentheses, and a minus 3. The plus 1 goes in the parentheses. The minus 3 goes in the parentheses. Here's my final answer where this is factored. I factored the GCF, and then I factored using the three-term method when the number in front of x squared equals 1. See how the number in front equals 1. When the number equals something else, you have, like 2, 3, 4, you have to use a different method. Some people know it as the AC method. Okay, so we factored 3 terms. Now we're factoring using the 4-term method. If you notice, I have 1, 2, 3, 4 terms. Not only that, there's another factoring we're going to be using here in a second, and I'm not going to mention it yet. But we're factoring using the 4-term method. Here's what you do for the 4-term method. Step 1, put parentheses around the first 2 terms. Put parentheses around the second 2 terms. This is a -9, so that negative has to be inside the parentheses. Since they're adding and subtracting, make sure there's a plus sign between them. I'm going to find the greatest common factor from each parentheses. So I'm asking, what's the largest number that divides into both of these? And the answer is 1. What is the lowest power x? The lowest power x, I have x3 and x2. The lowest power x is x2. I'm going to divide each of these by x2, 1x squared. And I get x3 divided by x2 is x, minus 2 divided by 1 is minus 2, and then these two cancel, x squared, x squared. Next, what is the largest number that divides into each of these? And the answer is 9 divides into each of those. What is the lowest power x? X to the 1 power, and no x. So I don't put any x outside the parentheses. Then I divide each of these by the number outside the parentheses, 9. Now watch what happens here. -9 divided by 9 is a -1x. 18 divided by 9 is 2. Now if you look at the 2 parentheses, they're not the same. When you factor 4 terms, the parentheses must be identical. The parentheses must be identical. They're not. But if you notice, they have both an x and they both have a 2, but they're different signs. If that happens, you just have to understand that you can divide both of these by -9. So instead of dividing by 9 or factoring out a 9, I'm going to factor out a -9. Watch what happens. -9 divided by -9 is a positive 1x. 18 divided by -9 is a -2. Do you see how the parentheses now are the same? Factoring 4 terms, the parentheses must be the same. This next step for factoring, since the parentheses are the same, we're going to divide out, we're going to bring out, pull out the x minus 2 into one parentheses. We're just pulling it out, and then it's multiplied by everything left over. Left over, I have 1x squared. I'm just going to put an x squared, 1x squared. And I have a -9. So this is my answer. X minus 2 times x squared minus 9. However, I have to recognize that I can factor using the 2-term method here. This is done. We're done with this part. But this x squared minus 9 is a 2-term method. Up here I said we're going to use the 4-term method, but we're also going to use the 2-term method because you can't stop factoring. You have to keep going till you can't factor no more. So the steps for the 2-term method, you put 2 perfect squares. You try to create 2 perfect squares. There must be a minus sign between them. You can't use the 2-term method if there's no minus sign between them. And in order for me to get x squared, I just put an x in here because x to the 2nd power is x squared. Now the question you have to ask yourself, what do I put in this parenthesis? Something squared equals 9, and the answer is 3. 3 squared equals 9. Once you have your perfect squares, you need to write 2 big parentheses. Whatever's in the first parentheses goes into the first spot of each. Whatever's in the last parentheses goes into the last spot of each. You're always going to have 1 plus and 1 minus. That's the answer. Don't forget, x minus 2 is part of my answer also. And this is the final factored answer. I have one more quick problem. I'm going to factor the GCF, then I'm going to factor using two-term method. What is the largest number that divides into both of these two? And if you look, the largest number is just 2. What is the lowest power x? I have x to the second power, and I have no x. So we're not putting any x outside the parentheses since we have no x. I'm going to divide both of these by 2. And I get 18 divided by 2 is 9 with an x squared. 32 divided by 2 is a negative 16. I have two terms. I'm now going to try to factor this using the two-term method. By the way, some of you might come across a problem that has this, but there's a plus sign. You have to have a minus sign between the two terms or you're done. If there was a plus sign here, I'm done. I can't factor anymore. You can only factor two terms if there is a minus sign between them. Luckily, right above here, there's a minus sign between them, so now I'm going to use the two-term method. Something squared minus something squared. Remember, there has to be a minus sign between them. So how do I get 9x squared to be perfect? Well, 3 squared is 9, and x to the second power is x squared. 16 is 4 squared. 4 squared. Once I have that, two big parentheses. Whatever's in the first parentheses, 3x, goes into the first spot of each. Whatever's in the second parentheses, 4, goes in the second spot of each. Make sure you put 1 plus and 1 minus, and you're done. Don't forget, this 2 is part of your final answer. We factored that out earlier. This was 4 problems. I hope this helps on how to factor using the different techniques. Thank you for watching the video.